If you've ever wondered how quickly a family can turn on you, let me tell you about the Thanksgiving when my children laughed at my gift, right in front of my face, and how, by the next day, they lost everything I ever gave them. I never thought I'd see the day when my own blood would mock me at my own table, but that's exactly what happened last November, and it changed the course of all our lives forever. The morning had started with the usual chaos. The smell of roasting turkey, the clatter of pans, the sound of my grandchildren running through the halls of the house I built with my own hands. My daughter Lisa and her husband Mark had arrived early, arms full of store-bought pies and expensive wine, their voices loud and cheerful as they swept in like royalty. My son Greg showed up late, as always, with his wife Amanda and their two sullen teenagers who barely looked up from their phones. I'd spent days preparing for this meal, polishing the silver, ironing the tablecloth, making sure every detail was perfect. It was the first Thanksgiving since my wife Carol had passed, and I needed this family to feel whole again, even if just for a few hours. I'd chosen my gift carefully, a small hand-carved wooden box, the kind my father had once made for me, filled with letters I'd written to each of them over the years. Memories, advice, stories of their childhood, and a check for each, enough to help with whatever they needed most. I wrapped the box in gold paper and set it at the center of the table, thinking it would be a moment of connection, a way to remind them of the love that still bound us together. But when dinner was over and I handed out the envelopes, Lisa was the first to open hers. She pulled out the letter, glanced at the check, and then burst out laughing. "Dad, what is this? A box of old stories and a check? Is this supposed to be sentimental, or just sad?" Mark snorted, waving his own letter in the air. "I guess this is what happens when you get old and run out of ideas. Next year, maybe just stick to gift cards." Greg chimed in, "I thought you were going to give us something real, Dad, not this, whatever this is." Even Amanda, who usually kept her mouth shut, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Well, at least it's not another ugly sweater." The kids barely looked up, but I saw the smirks on their faces, the way they nudged each other under the table. My hands shook as I tried to smile, tried to laugh it off, but inside something broke. I looked around the table I'd built in the house I'd paid for, surrounded by people I'd sacrificed everything for, and realized I was a stranger in my own home. The laughter echoed in my ears long after the plates were cleared, long after the wine was gone and the pie was served. When the last guest left, Lisa kissed me on the cheek and said, "Don't worry, Dad, we'll get you something nice for Christmas." I stood in the doorway, watching their cars pull away, the taillights disappearing into the darkness, and felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. They thought my gift was a joke. They thought my love, my memories, my hard-earned money meant nothing. They had forgotten who built this family, who paid for their college, their weddings, their first homes. They had forgotten the man who had always put them first, who had given and given until there was almost nothing left. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty box, and made a decision. If they wanted to laugh at my gift, if they wanted to treat me like a relic, then they could see what life was like without my generosity. By the next day, I would take back everything I ever gave them. And when they realized what they had lost, maybe then they'd understand the true cost of their laughter. I barely slept that night, the echo of their laughter gnawing at me as I paced the dark halls of my house. Every room was filled with reminders of the life I'd built for them, family photos on the walls, the piano Lisa used to play, the dent in the banister from Greg's skateboard, the kitchen where Carol and I had spent so many evenings side by side. I thought about the years I'd worked double shifts at the mill, the vacations I'd skipped, the dreams I'd put on hold so my children could have every opportunity. I remembered the tears in Carol's eyes when we sent Lisa off to college, the pride in my chest when Greg bought his first car with money I'd quietly slipped into his account. I'd never asked for thanks, never expected parades or speeches. All I wanted was a little respect, a little gratitude, a sense that the sacrifices Carol and I made had meant something. But last night, as I watched my family mock the gift I'd poured my heart into, I realized I'd been living in a fantasy. They didn't see me as the foundation of their lives. They saw me as a burden, a punchline, a wallet with a fading memory. By dawn, my mind was made up. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and began making a list. I started with the house. The deed was still in my name, a fact my children had conveniently forgotten. When Carol passed, I'd considered transferring it to Lisa, but something held me back. Now I was grateful for that hesitation. Next, I thought about the trust funds I'd set up for the grandkids, the college accounts, the emergency savings I'd quietly maintained for years. I called my lawyer, Mr. Harlan, a man I'd known since we were both young and hungry, and told him I needed to make some changes, immediately. "Walter, are you sure?" he asked, his voice cautious. "This is a big step." I told him what had happened, every humiliating detail, and by the time I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'll get the paperwork started," he said finally. "You deserve better than this." I spent the rest of the morning on the phone, calling banks, freezing accounts, redirecting automatic payments, changing beneficiaries. I called the property manager for the rental house Greg lived in, the one I'd bought for him when he lost his job, and told her to issue a notice. The lease would not be renewed. I called the dealership where Lisa's car was financed, under my name, of course, and arranged to have the payment stopped. I even called the private school where Mark and Amanda's kids were enrolled, letting them know the tuition checks would no longer be coming from me. Each call was a small act of liberation, a way to reclaim the years I'd spent being taken for granted. By noon, I'd undone decades of quiet generosity. I felt lighter than I had in years, the weight of obligation finally lifting from my shoulders. I made one final call to Lisa and left a message. "I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving. You might want to check your accounts." I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I poured myself another cup of coffee, sat in the sunroom Carol had loved, and watched the world outside come alive with the promise of a new day. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. I didn't know how my family would react, but I knew one thing for certain: they would never laugh at my gift again. And when the dust settled, maybe, just maybe, they'd remember who Walter really was. By midday, the first calls started coming in. I let them go to voicemail, my hands steady as I washed the breakfast dishes and tidied up the kitchen. The house felt different, lighter, almost peaceful, as if a storm had finally passed. I listened to the messages one by one, each more frantic than the last. Lisa's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Dad, what's going on? My car payment bounced and the bank says the account is frozen." "Call me back." Greg's message was angrier, his words tumbling over each other in a rush. "You can't just kick us out, Dad. I've got kids, I've got bills. What are you thinking? Even Amanda called, her tone brittle and desperate. Walter, the school called about the tuition. Please, we need to talk. I sat in my armchair, the same one Carol used to curl up in with a book, and listened to their panic. For years, I'd been the safety net, the silent force that kept their lives running smoothly. Now, with a few phone calls, I'd pulled the rug out from under them. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by something fiercer: pride. I was done being invisible. I was done being the family's silent benefactor, the man whose only value was in what he could provide. I spent the afternoon sorting through old letters and photographs, reminders of a time when my children had looked at me with love instead of expectation. I found a picture of Lisa on her first day of school, her hand clutching mine, her eyes wide with trust. I found a letter Greg had written from summer camp, thanking me for the chance to go, promising to make me proud. I wondered when that gratitude had turned to entitlement, when love had become a transaction. The phone rang again, and this time I answered. Lisa's voice was raw, on the edge of tears. Dad, please, we can't make the car payment without you. The kids need to get to school. Why are you doing this? I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. Lisa, I gave you everything I could. I paid for your house, your car, your children's education. I wrote you letters, shared my memories, tried to give you something real. And you laughed at me. You all did. There was a long silence, broken only by her quiet sobs. I'm sorry, Dad. We didn't mean it. We were just surprised. It was supposed to be funny. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. It wasn't funny, Lisa. It was cruel. And now you know what it feels like to lose something you took for granted. She begged me to reconsider, promised things would be different, but I'd heard it all before. I told her I needed time, that I was tired of being the family's ATM, tired of being invisible. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was living on my own terms. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sun set over the yard Carol had loved so much. I thought about the future, about what it might look like to live for myself, to find joy in the small things, to build a life that wasn't defined by what I could give away. I knew my family would be angry, that they would call me selfish, ungrateful, even cruel. But I also knew that I deserved better. I deserved respect. I deserved to be seen. And as the stars came out, one by one, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone laugh at my love again. The next morning, I woke to a house that felt both emptier and more alive than it had in years. The phone was already ringing. Greg this time, his voice hoarse with anger and fear. Dad, you can't do this. The landlord says we have 30 days to move out. Where are we supposed to go? What about the kids? I listened, letting his words wash over me, feeling the old urge to fix everything, to step in and save the day. But I stayed silent, letting him fill the space with his panic. When he finally stopped, I spoke quietly. Greg, I gave you that house because you needed a fresh start. I paid the mortgage, the taxes, the repairs. I did it because I love you. But love isn't a blank check. You laughed at me, Greg. You all did. You made me feel like a fool in my own home. He sputtered, trying to explain, to justify, but I cut him off. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because I need you to understand what it means to be grateful, to respect what you've been given. He hung up on me, and for a moment I felt the old ache, the longing for things to be simple, for my children to look at me the way they once did. But I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the freedom I'd found in drawing a line. I spent the day cleaning out the attic, sorting through boxes of Carol's things, her old recipe cards, the quilt she'd made for our first anniversary, the letters we'd written during our courtship. Each item was a reminder of a love that had been built on respect, on partnership, on the quiet understanding that real gifts are never measured in dollars. That afternoon, Amanda showed up at my door, her face drawn and pale. She stood on the porch, wringing her hands, her voice trembling. "Walter, please. The school says we owe 2 months' tuition. We can't afford it. The kids will have to leave." I looked at her, seeing not the woman who had rolled her eyes at my gift, but a other desperate for her children. "Amanda, I'm sorry, I really am. But I can't keep rescuing everyone. I need to take care of myself now." She started to cry, and for a moment I almost relented. But then I remembered the laughter, the way they'd all looked at me like I was a joke, and I steeled myself. "Maybe it's time you all learned to stand on your own." She left without another word, and I watched her walk down the path, her shoulders slumped in defeat. That night, I sat by the fire, the house quiet around me, and thought about the man I was becoming. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but I knew one thing. I would never again let my love be mistaken for weakness. I would never again let my generosity be taken for granted. And as the flames flickered in the hearth, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace I hadn't known in years. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, emails, and desperate messages. Lisa tried every tactic, pleading, guilt, even anger. "Dad, you're tearing this family apart. How can you do this to your own children?" she wrote in one message, her words sharp as knives. Greg sent a string of texts late at night, some apologetic, some furious, as if he couldn't decide whether to beg or to blame. Even the grandchildren reached out, their voices small and confused, asking why Grandpa wasn't helping anymore. I answered them gently, telling them I loved them, that sometimes grown-ups had to learn hard lessons too. I could feel the old patterns trying to pull me back, the urge to fix, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my own peace for theirs. But I held firm, reminding myself that this was about more than money or property. It was about respect, about teaching my family that love is not a right, but a privilege, one that must be earned and cherished. I started spending more time outside, walking the trails behind my house, letting the crisp autumn air clear my mind. I reconnected with old friends, men and women I'd lost touch with over the years, and found comfort in their company. We shared stories, laughter, and the kind of understanding that comes only from shared experience. I realized how much I had missed these simple pleasures, how much of myself I had given away in the name of family. One afternoon, as I sat on a bench overlooking the river, I saw a father teaching his young son to fish. The boy's face lit up with joy as he reeled in his first catch, and the father's laughter echoed across the water. I thought about Greg and Lisa as children, about the pride I'd felt watching them grow, about the dreams I'd had for their futures. I wondered when those dreams had become burdens, when love had turned into obligation. That evening, I wrote letters to each of them, not the kind filled with checks or advice, but honest words from a father who had finally learned to value himself. I told them I loved them, that I hoped they would find their own strength, that I would always be here if they needed me, not as a bank, but as a father. I sealed the letters and left them on the mantel. A quiet promise to myself that I would never again let my love be mistaken for weakness. As the days grew shorter and the leaves began to fall, I felt a sense of hope stirring in my chest. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain. I was finally free to live my own life on my own terms. As November faded into December, the silence from my children grew longer, broken only by the occasional message or awkward phone call. I could sense the shift in their voices. Less anger now, more uncertainty. As if they were finally beginning to understand that the old rules no longer applied. I spent my days in quiet contentment, tending to the house, reading by the fire, and volunteering at the local food pantry. The people there didn't know my story, didn't care about the drama of my family, and I found comfort in their easy acceptance, their gratitude for a warm meal or a kind word. I started to see myself not as a victim of my family's ingratitude, but as a man who had survived disappointment and found meaning on the other side. One snowy afternoon, I received a letter from Lisa. Her handwriting was shaky, the words hesitant. She wrote that she missed me, that the kids asked about me every day, that she was sorry for the way things had turned out. She didn't ask for money, didn't beg for help. She just wanted to know if we could talk. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, and felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I wanted to believe that people could change, that wounds could heal, but I also knew that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. I wrote her back, telling her I loved her, that I was proud of the woman she had become, but that I couldn't go back to the way things were. If she wanted a relationship, it would have to be built on respect, on honesty, on mutual effort. I mailed the letter the next morning, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Greg called a few days later, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He apologized, not just for the laughter, but for years of taking me for granted, for expecting me to solve every problem, for forgetting that I was a person with my own needs and dreams. We talked for a long time, about Carol, about the old days, about the future. He didn't ask for anything, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He just wanted to know if we could start over. I told him we could try, that I was willing to meet him halfway, but that things would have to be different. As the holidays approached, I found myself looking forward to each new day, to the small surprises that came with the changing season. The first snow, the laughter of children playing in the street, the warmth of a fire on a cold night. I realized that I had built a life that was mine, one that honored the man Carol had loved, the man I still wanted to be. I was no longer waiting for an invitation, no longer begging for scraps of affection. I was living on my own terms, and for the first time in years, I was truly, deeply content. Christmas arrived with a quiet grace. The world outside my window blanketed in snow. The streets hushed except for the distant sound of carolers and the laughter of children bundled in bright scarves. I decorated the house with simple touches, garlands on the mantel, a wreath on the door, a single string of lights along the porch. For the first time in years, I felt no pressure to impress. No need to prove my worth with grand gestures or expensive gifts. I baked Carol's favorite cookies, played her old records, and let the memories of our life together fill the rooms with warmth. On Christmas Eve, I received a call from Lisa. Her voice was gentle, almost shy. "Dad, the kids would love to see you. We're having a small dinner tomorrow. No gifts, no expectations, just family." I hesitated, the old ache flaring up. But then I remembered the promise I'd made to myself, to live on my own terms, to accept only what was given freely and with respect. "I'd like that," I said, my voice steady. "I'll bring dessert." The next day, I arrived at Lisa's house with a plate of cookies and a heart that felt lighter than it had in years. The children greeted me with hugs, their faces bright with joy. Greg was there too, quieter than I remembered, but with a new humility in his eyes. We sat around the table, sharing stories, laughter, and the simple comfort of being together. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic reconciliations, just the slow, steady work of rebuilding trust, one honest moment at a time. After dinner, Lisa pulled me aside. "Dad, I know we can't change the past, but I want you to know I'm grateful. For everything. Even the things I didn't understand at the time." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "That's all I ever wanted, sweetheart. Just to be seen. To be valued." As I drove home that night, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I realized that the Rita's revenge was not in taking back what I had given, but in refusing to let bitterness define me. I had built a life of meaning, of connection, of self-respect. I had shown my family and myself that love is not a right, but a privilege, one that must be earned and cherished. I stood on my porch, the cold air sharp and clean, the sky ablaze with stars. I thought of Carol, of the years we had shared, of the lessons I had learned in her absence. I whispered a thank you to the universe, to the people who had helped me find my way, to the man I had become. I was not defined by the laughter that once stung, nor by the doors that had closed behind me, but by the ones I had opened for myself. And in that quiet, starlit moment, I knew that I was, at last, truly free. The end.